The Galactic Council's decree arrived on a Tuesday, which Commander Zyrith Kthara found oddly appropriate for delivering an insult. On her homeworld of Vex Prime, the equivalent day was reserved for disposing of waste and settling minor disputes. She stood aboard the flagship Dominion's Grace, her scaled fingers drumming against the transparent aluminum viewport as she gazed at the blue-green planet rotating peacefully below. Earth. Category 7 civilization. Barely worth the fuel they'd expended to reach this backwater spiral arm of the galaxy. Such a primitive world, her tactical officer, Ren, muttered beside her, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence as he reviewed the data streams. They still use combustion engines. Combustion. They fragment their population into rival factions called nations. They've barely colonized their own moon. He made a clicking sound that indicated disgust among his people. Command wants us to establish a monitoring outpost here? For what purpose? To study inefficiency? Zyrith didn't respond immediately. She'd been conducting first contact protocols for the Galactic Council for 47 cycles, and she'd learned that appearances often deceived. Still, the evidence was damning. Humanity had only recently developed rudimentary quantum communication, their fastest vessels couldn't break light speed, and their most powerful weapons were fusion devices that would barely scratch the shields of a standard Council patrol craft. By every measurable metric, Earth warranted a Class 7 designation, observable but irrelevant. Protocol is protocol, she finally said, her voice carrying the melodic undertones of her species. We make contact, we assess their technological threshold, we offer them observer status, and we establish monitoring parameters. The Council fears they'll destroy themselves before reaching maturity. We're here to document their progress, nothing more. The diplomatic landing was scheduled for 0800 hours at a location the humans called New York, in front of a building they designated for international gatherings. Zyrith had studied their languages during the approach, absorbing the dominant tongues through neural download. English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic. So many languages for one species on one planet. The fracturing alone indicated their lack of advancement. Most civilizations unified their communication long before achieving orbital capability. The landing craft descended through scattered clouds, its presence announced by every primitive detection system the humans possessed. Zyrith watched their military forces scramble into defensive positions, their aircraft circling at respectful distances, their ground forces establishing perimeters with kinetic projectile weapons. Bullets. They still used bullets. She felt a mixture of pity and professional boredom as the craft settled onto the designated platform with barely a whisper of displaced air. The welcoming committee waited in a precise formation. Zyrith emerged first, her 7-foot frame covered in ceremonial armor that shimmered with embedded technology beyond Earth's current understanding. The humans stood frozen, their faces displaying the typical first contact mixture of fear and wonder. All except one. He stood slightly apart from the others, wearing a simple dark suit that contrasted with the military uniforms and formal diplomatic attire surrounding him. Dr. James Chen, according to her briefing files. Theoretical physicist. Advisor to the Human United Nations. Age 34, which was young for a human in a position of authority. He met her gaze directly, and she noticed his eyes held curiosity rather than fear. Interesting. Welcome to Earth, the designated speaker began, an older human female with carefully styled gray hair. We are honored by your presence and grateful for this historic moment. I am Secretary General Martinez, and on behalf of humanity, we greet you in peace. The formalities proceeded exactly as Zyrith's 300 previous first contacts had proceeded. Statements of peaceful intent. Exchanges of symbolic gifts. Careful diplomatic language that said much while promising nothing. She delivered the Council's message with practiced efficiency. Earth had been observed and categorized. They were not ready to join the galactic community. A monitoring outpost would be established. Earth's governments would be provided with basic educational materials to accelerate their development. In perhaps 200 or 300 years, they might qualify for provisional membership. She watched the humans. Reactions carefully. Disappointment. Wounded pride. Resignation. All typical responses from Category 7 civilizations receiving their assessment. But Dr. Chen's expression puzzled her. He looked almost amused. The formal proceedings concluded, and the humans offered a tour of their United Nations facility. Zyrith accepted out of politeness, though she expected nothing of interest. Ren accompanied her, along with 2 security officers whose presence was purely ceremonial. What threat could these primitives possibly pose? Dr. Chen somehow maneuvered himself into the role of guide, explaining various features of the building with a self-deprecating humor that Zyrith found unexpectedly engaging. "I know this must seem incredibly crude to you," he said as they walked through corridors lined with primitive art. "We're quite proud of our indoor plumbing and electric lighting, even if you've probably had those for millennia." "Several millennia, actually," Ren interjected with what Zyrith recognized as condescension. "We achieved post-scarcity economics before your species discovered agriculture." "Must be nice," James replied without any detectable offense. "We're still working on feeding everyone consistently. Though I suspect we'll figure it out eventually. We're stubborn that way." Something in his tone made Zyrith's sensory frills tighten with attention. Confidence. Not the bluster of inferior species trying to mask inadequacy, but genuine, quiet confidence. She'd encountered it before, but rarely in Category 7 populations. "Dr. Chen," she said, stopping in the corridor. "You seem remarkably unconcerned about the Council's assessment. Most civilizations at your developmental stage find the Category 7 designation disappointing." James turned to face her fully, and she was struck again by the directness of his gaze. Humans were a young species, barely different from their primate ancestors, yet something in those eyes suggested depths her initial assessment had missed. "Commander Kthara," he said, pronouncing her name with surprising accuracy, "may I ask you a question? How does the Galactic Council measure technological advancement?" "Through standardized metrics," she replied. "Energy generation capacity. Computational efficiency. Materials science. Propulsion technology. Weapons capability. Social cohesion indices. We've refined these measurements across 10,000 member civilizations over 50,000 years. The system is quite comprehensive." "I'm sure it is," James agreed. "But it measures what you understand, doesn't it? What if humanity has developed something that doesn't fit your metrics? Something your sensors can't detect because they're not designed to recognize it?" Ren made the clicking sound again. "Impossible. Our technology can detect everything from quantum fluctuations to dark matter currents. If you possessed any advancement beyond our assessment, we would know." "Would you?" James smiled, and Zyrith felt an unexpected flutter in her primary heart. Attraction? To a primitive human? Impossible. Yet something about him drew her attention in ways that transcended professional interest. "Commander, your scans of Earth have been quite thorough. But did you ever wonder why a Category 7 civilization hasn't destroyed itself yet? We have enough fusion weapons to sterilize our planet several times over. We have the technology to engineer plagues that could end our species. We have artificial intelligence systems that, by all your models, should have turned hostile. Yet here we are. Thriving. Growing. Still fundamentally human despite having every tool necessary for self-annihilation. Doesn't that seem odd?" Zyrith's analytical mind began processing his words with new attention. He was correct. Most Category 7 civilizations either destroyed themselves or transcended to Category 6 within a narrow temporal window. Earth had lingered in Category 7 longer than statistical models predicted. She noted it in the briefing materials but dismissed it as insignificant variance. "You're suggesting some unknown factor has preserved your species?" she asked carefully. "I'm suggesting," James said, his voice dropping slightly as if sharing a secret, "that humanity discovered something a very long time ago. Something we've refined and weaponized in ways your council has never encountered. Something that doesn't register on your technological scans because it isn't technological. Not in the way you understand technology. The corridor suddenly felt smaller. Zyrith's security officers tensed, their hands moving toward weapon systems. Ren's scales flushed with the purple tint of alarm. But Zyrith raised one hand, stopping them. This wasn't a threat. Not yet. This was something far more intriguing. What kind of weapon? She demanded. James's smile widened. The kind that makes every other weapon obsolete, Commander. The kind that operates on principles your civilization abandoned so long ago that you've forgotten they exist. The kind that can't be defended against because defense requires understanding. He paused, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her secondary heart accelerate. We call it human connection. And if you stay long enough, you might just fall victim to it yourself. Before Zyrith could respond, alarms suddenly erupted throughout the building. Ren's communication implant flared with urgent signals. The tactical officer's face went pale, his scales shifting to emergency crimson. Commander, he gasped. The outpost construction fleet. All 47 ships. They're standing down. Refusing orders. The crews are requesting political asylum. On Earth. Zyrith stared at him, then at James, who simply smiled and said softly, "It's already begun." The emergency council convened aboard the Dominion's Grace within the hour, but Zyrith's mind was still replaying that moment in the corridor. James Chen's knowing smile. The impossible claim. The statistical anomaly of 47 crews, comprising over 2,000 council personnel from a dozen different species, simultaneously refusing orders. It defied every protocol, every psychological model, every precedent in recorded galactic history. This is clearly a technological attack, Admiral Vorn insisted, his crystalline body refracting the light of Earth's sun into harsh geometric patterns across the conference chamber. Some form of mind control. Neural manipulation. The humans have hidden their true capabilities. Our medical scans show no abnormalities, the chief physician reported, her tentacles writhing with confusion. No foreign substances, no electromagnetic interference, no quantum entanglement signatures. The crew members are acting of their own free will. They simply don't want to leave. Zyrith studied the reports streaming across her tactical display. The defecting personnel had sent detailed explanations, and each one followed eerily similar patterns. They'd been invited to community meals by human families. They'd been shown around cities by volunteer guides. They'd attended what humans called cultural events, concerts, sporting competitions, art exhibitions. They'd talked. Just talked. With humans who asked questions about their lives, their worlds, their dreams. And somehow, impossibly, that had been enough. Permission to return to the surface, Zyrith said suddenly. Alone. The council chamber erupted in objections, but she silenced them with a gesture. Whatever is happening, it began the moment we arrived. It's accelerating. We need to understand it, and we won't find answers by scanning from orbit. I'm making direct contact with Dr. Chen. He's compromised you already, Ren said quietly. I saw how you looked at him, Commander. Whatever weapon they're deploying, you're already infected. Zyrith's frills flattened against her skull in annoyance, but she couldn't entirely dismiss his concern. She was experiencing something unprecedented in her 47 cycles of service. She wanted to see James Chen again. Not for tactical reasons or diplomatic protocol, but simply because his presence had awakened something she couldn't categorize or quantify. Then I'll confirm the infection vector, she said. Stand by with quarantine protocols if necessary. But I will have answers. She found James where he said he'd be, in a small establishment called a coffee shop near the United Nations building. He sat at a table by the window, 2 steaming cups in front of him, reading something on a primitive tablet device. He looked up as she entered, and that smile appeared again, the one that made her cardiovascular system behave erratically. Commander Kthara. I hoped you'd come. He gestured to the seat across from him. I took the liberty of ordering you something. Dark roast, no additives. I figured you'd appreciate it straight. Xyrath sat, her armor scraping slightly against the chair designed for smaller frames. The other humans in the establishment glanced at her with curiosity but not fear. Some nodded greetings. One small child waved enthusiastically until a parent gently redirected their attention. The normalcy of it felt surreal. "Explain what's happening to my crews," she demanded, though her tone lacked the authority she'd intended. "They're making friends," James said simply. He sipped his coffee, watching her over the rim. "They're experiencing something most advanced civilizations bred out of themselves millennia ago. Genuine, unstructured, purposeless social connection. That's not a weapon. Isn't it?" James set down his cup. "Commander, let me tell you what we learned about your galactic council. Every species that joins has reached a post-scarcity economy. Perfected technology. Optimized social structures. Eliminated inefficiency. And in doing so, you've all eliminated something essential. You've forgotten how to connect without purpose." Xyratha's analytical mind raced. Efficiency requires optimization. Resources must be allocated logically. Relationships serve evolutionary functions, reproduction, alliance building, information exchange. Exactly. James leaned forward, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "You've reduced connection to transaction. Every relationship serves a purpose. Every interaction has an objective. You meet to negotiate. To procreate. To exchange data. But when was the last time you simply spent time with someone because their presence made existence more enjoyable?" The question struck something deep in Xyratha's consciousness. She tried to remember her last interaction that hadn't served a tactical, reproductive, or social hierarchy function. The memories stretched back cycles. Decades. Before her military service began. "Humans never optimized that away," James continued. "We remained inefficient. We waste time with friends and family. We create art that serves no survival purpose. We help strangers we'll never see again. We fall in love." His gaze held hers. "We're really, really good at falling in love. This is your weapon?" Xyratha's voice emerged softer than she'd intended. "Emotional manipulation? Not manipulation. Invitation." James reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. "Your crew members aren't being controlled. They're remembering what it feels like to be valued as individuals rather than functional units. They're experiencing unconditional acceptance. They're making connections that feed something in them they didn't know was starving." Xyrath looked at his hand, so close to hers. Humans were tactile creatures, her briefing had noted. They touched constantly, handshakes, embraces, casual contact that served no reproductive purpose. Most advanced species found it primitive. But now, looking at James's outstretched hand, she felt an overwhelming desire to close that gap. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I want you to understand before you feel it," James said quietly. "Your council will classify this as an attack. They'll quarantine Earth, maybe for centuries. They'll warn other species about the human infection. But Xyrath, may I call you Xyrath?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Xyrath, what if we're not a threat? What if we're a cure for a disease your civilizations don't even know they have? What if the reason the galaxy feels so cold and empty isn't because the universe is hostile, but because you've all forgotten how to be warm?" Her hand moved of its own accord, closing the distance, her scaled fingers touching his soft, warm skin. The contact sent a cascade of sensations through her neural network, not just physical, but something deeper. Recognition. Resonance. The feeling of being seen not as Commander Kthara, diplomatic officer of the Galactic Council, but as Xyrath. Just Xyrath. "This is terrifying," she whispered. "I know," James said, his fingers gently curling around hers. "Being vulnerable is terrifying. Opening yourself to connection means risking pain. That's why most species optimize it away. But it also means risking joy. Real joy. The kind that makes existence feel like more than just efficient resource allocation. Over the next 3 days, Zyrith allowed James to show her Earth. Not the strategic locations or technological facilities, but the inefficient, beautiful, utterly illogical places humans gathered. A park where people threw plastic discs to canines they'd domesticated solely for companionship. A theater where actors performed ancient stories that everyone already knew. A restaurant where an elderly couple celebrated 50 years of pair bonding, surrounded by friends and family who served no function except to share their happiness. She met humans who asked about her life, her dreams, her fears. Not to gather intelligence or establish advantage, but because they genuinely wanted to know. She attended something called a block party where neighbors shared food and music and laughter for no purpose except community. She watched James interact with others, the casual affection, the inside jokes, the way he remembered small details about people's lives and asked follow-up questions days later. And she felt herself changing. The careful walls she'd built through decades of optimized service began crumbling. She laughed at a joke that had no logical structure. She cried at a film about fictional characters. She stayed up past optimal rest cycles just to talk with James about philosophy and art and the meaning of existence. On the 4th day, the Galactic Council issued their verdict. Earth was to be quarantined. All personnel were ordered to withdraw immediately. Any who refused would be stripped of citizenship and disavowed. Zyrith stood in her quarters aboard the Dominion's Grace, her service record displayed before her. 47 cycles of perfect performance. Commendations. Promotions. A clear path to admiralty. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd optimized herself to achieve. Her communicator chimed. James. I heard about the order. I understand if you need to leave. I won't think less of you. Won't you? She asked, surprised by the tightness in her voice. Zyrith, one of the things about real connection, you don't get to control the other person's choices. You can only be honest about wanting them to stay and accepting if they go. I want you to stay. I want to keep showing you terrible human cinema and introducing you to my terrible cooking. I want to hear more about growing up on Vex Prime and why you joined the military and what you dream about. But I want you to want that too. Not because I've manipulated you, but because connection is what you choose. Zyrith looked at her service record again. Then she looked at the viewport, at the blue-green planet below where a human waited, asking nothing except that she be herself. She made her choice. The Dominion's Grace departed 3 days later with less than half its original crew. Zyrith stood beside James, watching it disappear into the stars, feeling simultaneously terrified and more alive than she'd ever felt. What happens now? She asked. James took her hand. Now we write the next chapter together. Inefficiently. Illogically. Beautifully. And for the first time in 47 cycles, Zyrith Kthara smiled not because protocol demanded it, but because she was genuinely, inefficiently happy. 6 months later, the first ships began returning. Not to conquer or study, but to learn. To remember. To reconnect with something their civilizations had lost. The Galactic Council eventually reclassified Earth. Not as Category 7, but as something entirely new, Category Prime. The most dangerous and valuable world in known space. The planet that weaponized love. And used it to heal the galaxy.